everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gaming Mechanics podcast, where we seek to explore the unexplored topics of games, how they work, and why we love them. My name is Greg. I'm one of your co-hosts, along with the ever-illustrious Mark.
Hello, everyone.
There he is. And I'm back after a week of... It's been a weird
Yay.
month, fraught with, mouth injuries and Chicago.
Fraught with order. Chicago.
So... Yeah, no. It was. We didn't end up getting another show. At least, Mark did, which is awesome because he's fantastic. But I was out in good old Chi-Town visiting some friends for Memorial Day, and now I'm back, and I'm never leaving ever again. So that's good. And
yeah, Greg really got some perspective while he was gone, and he's never going anywhere.
What happened in Chicago? No, Chicago was great, But I'm back comfortable here in the Midwest. Mark, on the other hand, is uncomfortable down in the American Southeast.
We're all gonna die.
Very potentially, yeah.
Yeah, so Irma is on its way over here, and I'm going to be existing out the storm, weathering the storm. However you say that. Storm. I'm going to be out existing Irma.
I plan to continue to exist, so that's step one. My Irma plans.
So I'll be surviving down here in Florida.
Yep.
But we are recording this podcast a little earlier than normal. Actually, it will still come to y'all at the same time. But unbeknownst to only
totally
me and
Greg,
that we are recording slightly earlier in the week than typical.
Yeah. So yeah.
And I realized we did not forecast. Ironically. We did not forecast what we were going to be talking about this week. So, Greg, you want to intro our topic?
Absolutely. So, this week, as I forget how this... Oh, yeah, I was watching Day 9, my favorite streamer, and there was a short discussion on immersion in video games that came up on stream, and I was in the chat room, and I talked about it a little bit, and I was like, this is a great topic. So immersion is this bizarre thing that is definitely one of those buzzwords that we talked about a few times ago in terms of, I feel like damn near every game needs to have immersion in its pitch or, in any developer update or just when people describe it, immersion is just this go-to word, is something that's good and desirable for video games. And the way that the conversation, at least in Day 9 stream that we had very briefly, was in large part, immersion is one, super important, but also just horribly defined. And the goal of trying to define immersion probably isn't even the correct goal for when you're trying to talk about it. I think it is real, obviously, because so many people find it so important. But if you're trying to talk about immersion under the guise of just trying to define it, like, hey, this is what immersion means, and then X, Y, or Z is or isn't immersive, doesn't seem to be too helpful. So instead, what seems to be more helpful is defining what you find immersive, right? Communicating more than just trying to define a word. That's usually communication actually breaks down because you're not talking about the thing anymore. You're trying to define it, and that's just not. There's no actual communication or understanding of new ideas coming. So what we did was we were trying to think about immersion in our own ways and trying to, as a disclaimer, like I said, the point isn't to define immersion just objectively here for Mark and I. It's more we want to think about the games that we found hugely emergent, really immersive games that we've played, and then begin to think critically about what was so immersive about it, and what wasn't, what breaks immersion, that sort of thing,
right.
And then just go from there and try to communicate, like I said, just more descriptively rather than like, hey, this was really immersive.
Right.
Say, no, what was so immersive, and why was that important? Why was that engaging, and what pulled you in?
Right, and hopefully try to introduce like a shared vocabulary where, other than just the word immersive, where we can talk about, our experiences in game. I think we try to do that anyway in this podcast. But
yep.
Yeah, just being an example of having us have the experience of immersion, because I do think it appeals to something happening inside of the gamer, but then to actually take the time to unpack that without just using the word immersion.
Right.
Because it's important that we're able to talk articulately about what we like in games, because if we can't do that, then game designers can't make games that do those things.
Exactly. No, that's a really good point. There is some impetus on us as players, and I know this is a rather lofty ideal, but because read any internet comment section ever, not going to be finding particularly good communication. But on the other hand, it is important to be able to, like you said, articulate precisely what we mean. And I think that's a big part of a lot of failure in some games is that, like you said, these buzzwords get thrown around that are ill-defined, and the developer thinks it's one thing, and it's not, and so on and so forth. So I think that is something important. So I think the first example we were talking about was, so obviously there's like different, as we were kind of just brainstorming things that we thought of with immersion, like forgetting that you're playing a game was one kind of pseudo definition we were talking about. Like the experience of total just kind of like flow with a game where you are entirely, you've forgotten that you're playing, you forgot that you're in your living room or at your PC or whatever, you are completely in the world. Photorealism was another one that seems to be a big part of it. Obviously more, I would say immersive tends to be something that got talked about more recently with advances in technology where graphics and audio and just production of a game could become more and more realistic. So I
Right.
think that plays a part of it.
I can't imagine there would be such a hype around immersion with a game that's like Space Invaders, you know?
Exactly.
Like,
That wasn't really what was talked about in the 80s with video games too much, was it?
right.
And then to a certain level, intuition with a game where you don't have to be like, not metagaming, right? Not thinking about how to play the game and how to beat the game outside of it, but rather being able to, it's something you see in like role playing or Dungeons and Dragons, right? Where if you are talking, a huge amount outside of character or thinking about the best way for your character to complete this task as opposed to what your character actually would think, that's like non-immersive, right? That takes you out of it. So these are all just kind of base things that we were talking about brainstorming as things that seem to be some of the nuts and bolts of immersion, at least for us. And we were kind of starting to use some of these ways of thinking to begin informing our discussion. So the next thing we came to was, so I used as Mark and I, we actually spent probably more time on this pre-show than we have in other ones, going back and forth trying to figure out what we thought. But so one kind of key thing that we came to was this discussion, and we used Overwatch because that's a common game that both Mark and I have played and know pretty well. And so Overwatch is first person. You have a host of characters that you can get behind, and there's something actually very, very immersive in Overwatch for me, and I think for a lot of players in terms of the way the characters feel. I feel like, or I think feel itself kind of like, this feels really good. This feels like you are this person, like Doom 2016, right? That feels like you're a Space Marine. And so or for Overwatch, it really, like for the character Reinhardt, who's this huge armored, like in this powered armor knight with this giant rocket hammer, hammer with a rocket booster behind it that you swing. It feels, when you play him, it feels really good. It feels like you are this huge bastion of strength, and you
That's
feel
an
very
ironic
heavy.
choice of words.
Bastion, yeah,
A
right.
bastion. You're
That's another character who's named Bastion, who does not feel very bastion-y. He feels like just
he feels
complete
a
bullshit
little like a glass cannon. Yeah.
as a character, which I love. I love Bastion. But anyway, point is, so we were trying to unpack Reinhardt and like,
We
Mark, you
reached
want
an
to kind of talk
interesting
about some of
point.
the
Yeah. Well, because Greg's absolutely right. The character feels right and feels good. But there was this thing in me, that little alarm bell that went off, like, nobody knows what it's like to be somebody in power armor with a giant hammer and a laser shield.
right,
Like we don't have that experience. We've never even seen another human being having that experience.
right,
So how in the world do we have an intuitive sense of what this ought to feel like?
yeah.
That just seemed strange to me.
No, which is a fantastic point, because yeah, if in so much there's this level of games to be immersive or to feel good need to be touching reality. Like that was kind of my initial thesis, was like, yeah, no, it really nailed like the weight of his steps, right, in terms of the sound design. It really nailed the abilities mechanically that you have. You have this giant shield that doesn't break very easily. When you swing your hammer, it moves people physically in the game world. It doesn't just bounce off them. It had all these things that I was like, yeah, it really captures the feeling of being a Reinhardt. And Mark was like, what? how would you know what that feels like? Why is that? No one knows what that feels like. Or similarly with like Tracer, who teleports around, right?
Right.
Um,
And so any game,
so that was a conundrum.
right? Like it would if without this, it would mean that any game that was attempting to do something fantastical couldn't possibly feel immersive, which is
Right.
obviously not true.
Right.
So it begs or raises the question, where do we get our expectations for what things ought to feel like when they are fantastic?
Right. And that was another thing that I think we kind of came up to, which was expectation seems to be a big part of that, of immersion, in this case. As well as, so you're talking about, like, right, how if a game is just tries to do anything fantastical, then it couldn't be immersive, which obviously isn't true. But the other side of that kind of coin, which you also said, Mark, was
Hmm.
that basically a game can't be, if it is fantastical, it can't be the other extreme where the game just gets to tell you what it is,
Right.
and then you feel immersed in it. Like if that was true, then every game ever would just be immersive. Like it can't
Right.
be, a game can't be the final authority on what it is. Otherwise, it would never ever feel off.
Right.
It would never
Exactly.
feel. You would just take exactly what the game gave you and be like, "Oh, this must be what this feels like." But that's not true either. So there is some like pre-existing, expectation or knowledge or intuition or imagination that we have, I
Hmm.
think, as gamers. And I was as we were talking through this, I was thinking about it, kind of from my own little psych background, and I do wonder if like basically if non-gamers in large part wouldn't find any, most games in general, just they would have a lot harder time feeling immersed in games.
Hmm.
Um, because in general, potential, like, okay, so like take Reinhardt, as that example, or like Doom 2016, right, where you're just the classic space marine on Mars killing demons, like so video game-y, like so like kind of nerdy. Like I, as a nerd and person who loves fantasy and science fiction, and have spent a lot of time in my imagination thinking about these things, do have this kind of like working. I've put myself in that place of what it would feel like to, or have wondered, have thought about and tried to imagine what it would be like to be some of these characters. What it'd be like to fire this huge gun, or have this powered armor on. I have some
Right.
working schema in my mind of what it would be like to be in these fantastical worlds, because I spend a lot of my headspace in those, or I spend a lot of time reading or watching things, or in this case playing. I've played a lot of games where you are a space, marine, or someone in
Right.
heavy powered armor, and
Hmm.
uh, and so I do have this weird kind of pre-existing, even though it's not based on reality. I've never been in that and never will be. I
Right.
do have spent so much time having done this that I do have this pre-existing notion of what I think this should feel like.
Right. It's
Um,
sort of a shared vocabulary for something, even though it's fantastic. Like
yeah,
even how we would conceive of orcs or
yeah,
dwarves.
yeah, precisely. Yeah, no, that's a
We've
great one.
never met a dwarf, but a lot of people, since pretty much since Tolkien, have a pretty consistent understanding of what a dwarf is like and what their culture is like and what they do.
Right. Right. Yeah. So there is very much this thing inside of you that does feel that way, and allows it to, like I said, if I load into to Overwatch and all the art assets were the same, but like when you swung his hammer, it didn't do any damage, or it like I said, it bounced off of things, or his shield goes down 2 or 3 hits, that would feel bad. That would be like there's be something intuitive in me just immediately. It was like, no, this isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to feel. Um,
Right.
and so Mark kind of kept on pushing back against me in this regard, which was, you posited the idea that a game. Well, how about you just say it?
Yeah, well, I sort of started with the idea that the game suggests a character to you, tells you what to expect, and then fulfills that expectation,
Right.
which Greg pushed back on. We refined that a bit more to say, like, okay, the player must come with some of their preconceived notions.
Right.
It's not totally unlike when a movie asks you to suspend disbelief, but it still has to be internally consistent. Like,
Yeah.
even in the suspension of disbelief, they can't just do whatever they want and have you go along for the ride as the audience, because that would be terrible storytelling.
Right. Right.
Because then it'd be really easy for the movie to solve its own problems. It's like, oh, well,
Right.
then their solution warped out of space time and just appeared, and there you go, the problem was
Exactly.
solved,
And you
which
have
would
to
be
deal with that.
right, which would be awful.
Right. Exactly. No one would like that. So that's so yeah. So anyway, so that's I think we kind of came to a cool like understand. Like I think we were both right to an extent, right? I think there is a level of even in that very initial, right. If you load up Overwatch, you've never played it before, have no idea what's going on, and you hit the character select screen, and you're going through the characters, and you click on Reinhardt, and here appears this gigantic character, bigger than the other ones, like very obviously, and he has just the way he moves, even in that little character select screen. Is very weighty, and you immediately have a sense of what the game is going for with him, right? So there is that level of the game does in fact present. I was kind of saying I don't think the game can present and then tell you what it is. I think it can only do one of those, basically. It can't fulfill and present. But I think it does to a very small extent. And what my kind of I thought cognitively what happens is in that moment when you see that character immediately, that activates all these kind of schemas or sets of ideas and preconceived notions, and it kind of triggers this part of you that already has all those ideas, and you begin interacting with the game in that way. And then you load in and begin moving, and you say, okay, I see his feet are moving in this way that I agree with. That matches up with the way I think he should feel. Or maybe the hammer, wow, the hammer swings differently than I thought it would. But that's actually, the more I think about it, the more this does feel more than what my original preconceived notion of how the hammer would feel works. So I'm going to update mine. And it becomes kind of the cycle in the game of you comparing what you think the game should be like with what it presents, and hopefully if the game is done well, right, if it taps into something that is kind of true in this kind of shared vocabulary, then you do in fact you update with the game, right?
Right.
It's this kind of continual learning that goes on, and eventually, with enough time, I've probably played hundreds of hours of Overwatch by now. You just have, it's become a new part of your pre-existing, like now when I load up another game, Reinhardt will be something that has been integrated into my idea of what those characters should feel like, and I will either intuitively or even intentionally kind of compare another character like that to, like, hey, Reinhardt nailed this feel for me.
Mm-hmm.
How does this game do that? And it's kind of this continuing building idea of what these fantastical things are. I think we get a big sense of that from the game itself. So
Yeah. So where we landed on this was sort of the gaming is, or learning and expectation in a game is dialectical. There's a conversation happening between you and the game, and your expectations get refined. It's not unlike having a conversation with a person. Like you can't predict what that other person's going to say all the time,
right.
But you would be able to tell if they just completely first of all, if they weren't listening, if they just jumped topics randomly, if they said potato and you were having a conversation about automobiles, like that would be weird. So you still, even though you can't tell what they're going to say, there's still a sense of like this is within the range of possibility.
Yeah, it's very, very similar. And in so much as that, so all that was just kind of say that this is a little bit of a digression, I think, in some ways, in terms of, this conversation is slightly on its own.
It's certainly highbrow.
It is, but it's fun. I don't know, man. This is the point. This is
anybody. We will get to more concrete things in a moment here.
Yeah, but this is also like why we do this podcast. Like this was.
Absolutely.
I feel like this is a great return of form. We are getting way too practical in the past few choices. Come on, how practical is that?
That's true. It's right in the opening blurb. The unexplored topic.
that was not practical at all. But in any case, so in terms of like that whole idea of like having expectation going into it, I think was really key with Immersion as we were thinking about it, which was you can't really separate out. It is going to be so specific to each person because each person's going to have those different expectations. I think that's why people disagree about Immersion and why it's kind of useless to try to objectively define it. Is because I think it's so it's so dependent on what you bring into a game and what you're looking for. So yeah, that was our kind of slight dialectical digression. But past that, let's just go into games now. Let's just talk about our favorite immersive games and what we found immersive and what didn't.
Right.
You want to start? How do you want to go?
Yeah. I can start. So. For this, actually, when researching this topic, I've decided to start playing the game Firewatch, and very, very good game. I didn't know how good it would be, actually. I got it in a bundle, and I mostly bought the bundle in order to get Undertale, but I ended up also getting Firewatch. So I played it for a bit, and I was impressed by how immersive the game was, honestly. And I will unpack that because what we're going to be doing here is not just using the word immersion, but saying what other things that might be more helpful when describing a game. So For those of you who don't know, Firewatch is a first-person game. It's very narratively driven, very conversational, a lot of choices, a lot of dialogue options. But you're a park ranger in the middle of a forest, and you do things that a park ranger would do, and it's up to you to prevent forest fires or whatever. Um, in much to Smokey the Bear's chagrin, there are
Yeah.
actually people whose job it is to prevent forest fires.
Yeah.
So uh,
I
it's
never thought about that. It's like, no,
it's
no, no. We actually do hire people to do that. Like, it is, of course, up to everyone,
Smokey's like,
but
what?
kind of not too.
No,
Yeah.
no, nobody told me.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny.
Uh,
We actually
but
hired someone to prevent forest fires to come up with that slogan so that we can prevent more forest fires. Like,
yeah, hey, that's a good point. It's like maybe actually it's actually Smokey the Bear is preventing forest
yeah,
fires.
I know. Yeah, yeah.
But I thought it was only me.
But I know. But I thought it was what? Okay.
Anyway,
Smokey the Bear
uh,
existential crisis. Like,
I am replacing myself.
I know. I know.
So you
Okay.
start, you do some very basic fire prevention stuff, and then things start to go off the rails pretty quickly. And I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but suffice it to say, you are a person with a map and a compass walking around a very beautiful park area, and that's pretty much all you have. You've got a walkie-talkie. You can be in communication with some of the other rangers, and because the mechanics are so simple, and because it's so like most of what the game gives to you is just the environment, and they did a great job at that. It feels like you're a park ranger walking around in a forest. Like I think it does fit with that expectation of like this is kind of what it would be like to be a park ranger. There are books everywhere. Like that's such a small thing for a game to do, but I think it's brilliant because anytime I've ever been to like a ranger outpost, there's always been like really old books you've never heard of sitting around, and they're like some of them are about wildlife, some of them are like mystery novels, but there's always books, and I didn't even
I've
realize
never noticed that before.
really I know I felt like well, as I was playing I kept
It
seeing these
sounds right though.
books everywhere, and I'm like this does feel right. It does feel like there should be a bunch of books, and
Yeah.
probably the books are like super deep and meaningful, and like by the time I finish the story I'll realize that every book was telling me something.
Yeah.
But right now it just feels like no, it makes sense that there would be books at this ranger outpost, and everything's kind of run down, and I'm having to board up windows and stuff, and it feels consistent with the expectation that the game has set that you're kind of this park ranger walking around.
Yeah.
There were a couple times where that experience got broken, actually, and those I think that's where some good discussions can come out of because it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, they nailed it, it's fine, but it's nice to be able to unpack like, okay, when it breaks, how does it break, and why does it break?
Totally. And it's also interesting that, like you were talking about, it's a very simple concept in a lot of ways already, right? It's not, you're not managing like a galactic spacefaring empire, right? Like,
Right.
how many things do you need to be able to, like, trying to feel immersed in that? Again, like, there's less and less. Like, the Space Marine powered armor scenario, that's like a pretty common trope. It's like, we probably have an idea of that. Like, there's so
Right.
many more bits of data that you need. Like, the more complex the thing is, probably the harder the immersion is going to be because you need to be drawing on so many other things that you might not have. With the Park Ranger, that's not too hard, right? You can just kind of immediately go to like, oh, yeah, that's probably what it feels like. Like, I could sit here and imagine what it must be like already, and then there's not too many pieces of actual information I need to hold consistent in my mind.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, that makes sense why it would be pretty easy to initiate that immersion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the points where I think that it reminded me that I was playing a game, which maybe that's another way to talk about immersion breaking, but like
Mhm.
it felt like the game was unnecessarily limiting, and when it used invisible walls, for example.
Yeah.
Most people are familiar with game walls, like where you're walking around. It feels like you should be able to go somewhere, or like at least like climb up onto a ledge or something, and the game is just like, nope, there's nothing to do here, and
Right.
you just can't go any further. Or like where it looks like you should be able to go into a body of water, but your character just stops moving forward because you can't go into the water.
Right.
Without an in-game explanation, there's nothing other than, nope, you can't move forward anymore, as
Right.
if you.
Entirely contrived.
And so obviously that's going to remind you that like, oh, there are very specific boundaries and like a very specific track that you're on in this game.
Hmm.
And for a game that does such a good job presenting a realistic environment to you, to then artificially put restrictions into that environment,
Yeah.
that breaks. I think what my expectation was that this was going to be a pretty open world where they were going to give me a lot of autonomy and ability to kind of do what I wanted. And so even there
Right.
was a part where like I needed to get around a fence, and you can clearly see the end of the fence. And like there's just like a rock kind of to the left of the end of the fence. But
Right.
like that's totally a rock you could get over. Like
Right.
it was not even above eye level. So it's not unrealistic to think that you could just climb up on that rock and go around the fence, not a big deal. But instead you end up going on a side quest in order to figure out how to get through this fence.
Right, which sounds like kind of that metagaming aspect I was talking about before, where you're looking at the game and thinking about the game, and you're like, wait, no, no, no. This is if I wanted to actually solve this problem, this is the way I would do that. But the game's not letting me, so I have to think within the game like that. That's
Right.
yeah, that's a very much taking you out of your character or what your character would be experiencing.
Yeah, the metagaming idea. I mean, that's an interesting, like another interesting way to talk about immersion breaking. Like
Right,
when you stop thinking, what would I do as a park ranger, and you start thinking, what would I do as a gamer who has a lot of gaming experience?
right,
Like, what do games try to do? And I'm like, oh, okay, so they want me to,
right,
go to this part of the map that I haven't explored yet because they want me to have exposure to everything in the map, and
right,
they want me to collect a specific item that I can use to get through this gate.
right,
And that's
right.
totally what they ended up having me do.
Yeah.
But I was thinking at that point like somebody with gaming experience, not like somebody who is controlling fires in a park.
Right, or even just like even outside of just you're thinking as a gamer who's trying to solve a problem as opposed to a gamer who is trying to experience the game. You know,
Right.
like it maybe I don't know if like the complete trying to think as just like your character. You know, I again even talking about immersion, we've kind of been taking for granted that immersion's a good thing, right? And it's desirable, and breaking it is bad, which I think I'll address a little bit later to an extent, but it's just I don't know if there's a level of like yeah I think that high level of like metagaming tends to be not enjoyable for a player. Maybe that's a better way to talk about it. Less enjoyable at least. But I don't know if you always have to be as like I am this park ranger entirely. Like maybe it is okay sometimes to be like yeah I see like I'm still a gamer, but I'm just very much bought into what's happening, and I want to experience it, and I want to experience it as the game takes it, you know.
Mhm.
And then times like that, when the game asks you to do something that doesn't match up with that like desire as a gamer, you're like, okay, well, this sucks. Now I'm not. Now I'm not with you anymore. You know.
Mhm.
So anyway, I just had that thought of maybe it's not entirely necessary to be that 100% immersion all the time, but um, it definitely makes a difference when you. There does seem to be a line where when you get past it is actively detrimental to the
Mhm.
experience of the game.
Well, and don't get me wrong, like I was bought in for the side quests that I had to go on to get this item
Yeah, sure.
because I was like, I want to see what happens next in the story. And
Yeah,
so like clearly I can tell this is how they're making me progress to the next part of the story.
yeah,
But it was heavy-handed.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it would ironically it wouldn't have been so heavy-handed if they just would have made the darn rock higher. Because then it's
yeah,
like, no, there really is no way to get through this fence. Like,
yeah,
and maybe even if they put barbed wire on the top of the fence, which I don't think there was. Because otherwise, it's like, well, just scale the fence. Like, this is,
yeah.
if you really want to get through there, just climb over.
Right.
Um, what, and so they can do things in order to that actually seem more heavy-handed, but make the things you need to do in the game feel more warranted than just like, okay, well, I know I need to do this, and I do want to do it because I want to see the rest of the story, but
Right.
I think there's an easier way. Like, I don't necessarily agree that this is how the story had to play out.
Right. Yeah, totally. So as well as you got, I mean, so hitting invisible walls, that was one of them.
Yeah,
Um,
there was a couple other. I would say these
just
are
gaming
more,
mechanics in general.
yeah, minor things, which would just be like uh, when you looked at the map, there was a little dot that showed you where you were and which direction you were facing and where you had been. Um, and that is obviously not something you would have on a paper map. And so
Right.
I wouldn't actually have even
Outside of
caught
Harry
this.
Potter, I guess.
Yeah, right. I wouldn't actually have thought that this is immersion breaking because it's such a common game thing. But when the game presented me with what I assumed was going to be a very realistic sort of park ranger game with a very minimal interface, and it gave me a map. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to look at this paper map and figure out like where I am and get to know this forest really well and like find
Right.
landmarks and like maybe I'll be able to like make little markings of where different things are and this is gonna be cool. And
Yeah.
then they provided with me a little dot that told me where I was. So it saved me a
Right.
lot of work. But I was kind of getting excited about this idea because then the heads up display in a game telling you where you are is such a common thing. I was
Right.
kind of excited to like use a map and like navigate this forest just without any sort of assistance. And so there was a moment where I was like, ah, okay. I mean, this makes my life easier.
Right. And you even said like the difference too between all of your other tools that you had and the map. Like most of the other tools were that kind of level of simple.
Yeah, like the
Um,
compass, there's nothing special about the compass. It
it's
functions
just
just
it's
like a,
just a compass, right?
right.
So having that disconnect between certain tools that you had took you out of it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only item that's really augmented in that way. And
Hmm.
so like I will say that there's a pack that you have that has basically an infinite amount of rope that you can use for tie-offs and rappelling.
Right.
And that was another thing that I was like, I feel like I want a better explanation for where I'm getting all this rope.
Right. Which is just kind of the mechanics versus the
Right. Like how
yeah.
much do you want to inconvenience your player so that it is like just exactly like, it's not all about simulating.
Right.
We've talked
Exactly.
about that before.
Yeah.
But it did, at least it was for me, a mental moment where I was like, oh, this is convenient, but like in a way that reality isn't. Like,
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
like it's
Which
kind of like how you never have to watch people in movies go to the bathroom. You're like, well, you don't
right.
miss it, but like it's not
Yeah.
realistic.
Yeah. Which in a movie that was about people going to the bathroom would be weird. Like so if okay, let me explain. Um
Yeah, do tell me about this
yeah, yeah,
movie,
yeah.
please.
No, no. Okay. So well in a game that is asking you to be immersed in that realistic way, right? Where it's asking you to like a big part of the game is it's really simple. You're just walking, you just kind of have to figure out the story as it comes. It isn't very fantastical in a lot of ways. In a game that's asking you to buy into that, then having those mechanics, basically, if you're in a really fantastical game, right? Like you don't think in Overwatch, you don't feel weird about the fact that there's fantastical elements because the whole game's fantastical and doesn't
Right.
break your immersion because it's within the world that the game asks you to believe in. In this game, it kind of mixes those, right? It asks you to believe in a very very grounded, concrete world, and then has these kind of breaks in that. So if the game doesn't ask you to do that, then yeah, you can get away with infinite rope
Right.
or maps that you can see yourself on. Or even if immersion or that kind of feeling of being lost in a game isn't something a game goes for, right? There's fantastic games that aren't immersive, or that no one calls immersive, right?
Right.
Um, then at that point, those games, that you don't get docked for having these weird things. But when a game does try to, it seems to part of the experience is intentional or is intended to be immersive. Then yeah, they have to be a little bit more careful about that. I'm not gonna the comment about like a movie about people going to like that was more. Yeah, let's just drop that. That was it made sense in my mind of like if a movie's asking you to believe something and then it doesn't
Right.
show it, then yeah, that
It's
makes sense.
it's about that suspension of disbelief. Like, if the movie never presents the idea that people can fly, and then all of a sudden there's flying people, that's a real problem.
Yeah,
But if
exactly.
it's a movie about, like Angels in the Outfield or whatever, like where people can fly, then well, then it's okay.
Is that what that movie's about? I don't know if I've ever seen that movie.
I don't know. There are
People
angels and
fly
they're
in
in
that
the
movie?
outfield. It's pretty great.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, I have seen, yeah, 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 and they end up, yeah, yeah, they come out of the woods or the not the woods. That's
The You're
like,
thinking of, I think you must be thinking of The Strangers
I know,
or
right? Yes, M. Night Shyamalan's The Village.
yeah,
Uh, anyway,
maybe
okay,
Soul.
it's a really terrifying. It's like Angels in the Outfield, and it's the exact same movie except they just come out of the woods instead. It's way more
It
terrifying.
is way more. Anything that comes out of the woods is a bit more
I know,
terrifying.
totally. Yeah, it's just
It's actually
again,
most of
it's
the,
that shared cultural vocabulary, man. Of just like the woods are fucking scary sometimes.
and that's kind of the premise behind Firewatch. It's
Yeah, exactly. No, precisely. Yeah, I mean, like, okay, so I'll move on then to well, I have there's two areas. I think I'll go. So one game that I've played that was highly immersive was Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which was notable when it came out for being one of the scariest games of all time, was often as it was described. And it was interesting because it was not the classical scary game in a lot of ways. When you think of scary games, or maybe think of Silent Hill or Resident Evil, more like Fear, more classic horror games. I didn't play horror games, so my vocabulary is limited in that one. But you tend to think of like legitimately like kind of classic horror movie tropes with horrifying images, torture, you know, lots of gore, terrifying imagery, that sort of
Teapots.
thing. Monsters, right? Yeah, yeah.
Teapot.
And teapots?
Yeah. There's always the teapot that was whistling right at the scary moment. Or babies that cry. Come on, this is super common.
No, I know that's fine. Yeah, I just want to make you feel like you were insane. Yeah, no, you're right. No, dude, teapots, yeah, teapots are more dramatic, like tension building. I feel like
Okay,
the
fair
baby's
enough.
crying. Holy, oh yeah, f that, man. Forget that. Wow, I'm like never gonna have kids for that reason.
Yeah, right.
Um,
In the middle of the night, your child wakes you up. It's
yeah,
crying.
yeah,
It's like there's an axe murderer hiding
right,
in the
right,
child's
yeah, very
bedroom, right?
nearby, or it's my child.
Is the axe?
Um,
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so point is, those are the tropes. Amnesia doesn't have any of that. There's no crying babies or T-bots. And the reason that it was so scary was actually very often talked about because it was so immersive. The sound design was ridiculously good. Everything sounded very. You're basically, you wake up. In short, you wake up in a old like 1800s castle, basically, and you have no memory of who you are, or I think you know your name, but you don't know anything about why you're here or what's going on. You just have a note from yourself that says, "Descend to the bottom of this castle, find this man named Alexander, and kill him." And that's the whole setup for the game. And you can't. You're also very limited in what you can do. There's no combat in the game. You can basically you can pick things up, and you can walk and run, and you can crouch, and you have light is a big mechanic in the game. So you have a lantern that you can light, and you can light like things in the environment like candles, and that's it. That's the whole game. That's all you can do. And the reason it was so terrifying was because, one, partially the feeling of helplessness that you had. You couldn't fight. You couldn't do anything basically when the monsters came. You could only hide and run. And that feeling of helplessness is legitimately terrifying, deeply unsettling as a player. Two, the ambiance and the slow build of it was very terrifying. It wasn't horrifying. Horrifying, I've heard defined as like the fear of what you can see and the fear of the known, and terrifying is like the fear of the unknown, things you don't see. So there's so many just incredibly unnerving things that happen in the game in terms of the way the sound works, the things you can hear. The certainly the environment itself, the art is wonderfully done. And then as you learn certain things about the story's revealed as you find your memories again. You begin remembering all these horrifying things that have happened and that you've done. And that's very unsettling too. So the point is, this game was, in large part, it's very hard to show someone a clip of Amnesia and be like, dude, look how scary this is. It's like, they won't find it scary, I guarantee you. But the reason it was so terrifying and that people were legitimately, disturbed by it, was this immersion. Basically, is that it asked, even when I was talking about like that feeling of helplessness, the game is asking you to be in your character's shoes. If you don't feel like your character in that moment, then you're not going to feel anything. And another note is that, honestly, probably game's not too long. There's one really long optional side quest you can do at the end that lengthens it by like 4 hours. But in general, I think the game's close to like
Where you go back for the rope?
yes, where you go back for the rope, more or less, yeah. But the game, in large part, is pretty short. It's like 15, 20 hours, maybe tops. And honestly, once you kind of learn the game and how it works, and you begin to metagame a little bit, it does become far less scary. I can confirm that, both from playing it myself and having watched other people play. Once you kind of figure the game out and you're no longer, it doesn't feel as dangerous anymore, then it's far, far less scary. So anyway, so the thing that I want to note most about Amnesia, outside of, like I said, all those kind of classic parts, I think it's really interesting, one, that horror is very immersive. Fear tends to be very immersive. But two, that the other thing that's really important with Amnesia was if you take your laptop to Starbucks in the summer and you play with, your like Apple earbuds in, this is not going to be a scary game. You will not, I guarantee you won't be scared. the way to make that game feel scary is to be alone in a room, you turn off all your lights, and you have good headphones on. And then I guarantee you, I don't care. Like it's incredible. Like things that do not appear scary at all, or I could describe to you, wouldn't be scary. You will just be deeply unnerved, because it kind of feels like you're in this horrifying place, in this dark, mysterious, gothic place that with this growing sense of unease. So that was interesting to me, and maybe we could talk about that for a second. Just the idea that some immersion requires IRL immersion, in real life immersion. The fact that it depends upon it is so atmospheric and requires you to be so bought in that you literally can't have anything else around you taking away from it.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'm actually trying to think of other examples
Yeah, I was trying to
outside
as
of
well.
like horror games. There is something, well, and yeah, so let's explore that for a second before we jump into anything else.
Right.
Um, so
I mean, outside of horror, I was trying to think.
I mean, because I really liked Wind Waker, and I was like, would like sailing in the Wind Waker be better if I was like sitting by the lake, like on the dock,
Right.
and I was playing Wind Waker? Like, would sailing feel more like sailing? I actually think it might a little bit,
I don't know.
but I don't think it would have the same sort of effect as sitting and watching Amnesia in the dark, which is like a world of difference, you know?
Yeah, like I even like watched someone play Amnesia, and it was harder to watch them play it in the dark with my headphones on than even if I had my headphones off, or just like in my dorm room. I was a freshman in college. I remember when that came out, and so yeah, it's just a really interesting thing that to some extent, some games are so they require such a level of that of buying, and it's first person too. That's another common theme. Obviously, first person games seem to encourage that projecting into the game as individually. They seem to encourage that more. But some games require that so much that you literally need to have everything else around you be echoing that.
Yeah,
But
like
then
if
when you
I,
do that, then it succeeds massively. Like I mean, I had to stop playing. Like I'm not a huge horror buff in general, but Amnesia. I mean, I had to stop. I had to stop. I couldn't do it for more than like an hour tops. It's exhausting. Like my neck hurt at the end of it from tension.
yeah, I can't imagine like going out and camping in the middle of nowhere and pulling up Slender on your computer and
Yeah,
playing
exactly.
it.
Yeah, no,
Like,
dude, that's a great
I would just
example.
lose my mind.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Play a horror game in the woods, in the fucking woods. Like that would
right.
be
I think
horrible.
there's something about like strong emotions eliciting a sense of immersion that I wonder if we're tapping on. Like that when people say something is immersive, they mean that like I feel something strongly while I'm playing this. And I
Sure.
think that fear is one that's especially easy for us to augment.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
I
very powerful
mean,
feeling.
if I was playing Heavy Rain and I surrounded myself with like pictures of like dead relatives and like
Yeah,
just
yeah. And it's
sad
raining
played
outside,
yeah, I
and
played sad music or something, and like I think maybe I could get more into the mournful atmosphere of that
yeah, the
story.
weight of it. Yeah.
And so that I think maybe the emotion, if you can find out a way to environmentally augment the primary emotion of the game, if it has one, like
Right.
horror games, obviously it's fear.
Right.
It's hard to say there's a primary emotion to Super Mario Galaxy,
Right.
but I think if you can find a way to augment that, you can make the game feel more
Right.
immersive to you because
Yeah.
the emotions are that the game is connecting with are more present.
And then even there's enough. I mean, even like neurologically, right? Like when the fear kind of mechanic neurologically is a very old one in the brain. It's like back towards your brainstem as opposed to your kind of your frontal lobe, right, where you have like high cognitive functioning, and so fear is actually very like primal emotion, right? Kind of the fear, fight or flight mechanic, and the limbic system
Hmm.
getting aroused. So I would say if that like yeah, it would make sense to me if there's part of that if the game's trying to activate that part right of your brain, that fear kind of very primal part. But your prefrontal cortex can look around the room and be like, no, I'm not actually in this place. I'm not in danger right now. I'm not in this place. Then it's a lot easier to kind of modulate that. But if you turn off all the lights and turn out your brain physically, like your prefrontal cortex, the place that can think rationally and abstract, has a lot harder time telling your brainstem or your
So
amygdala that no,
calm
we're not in
down.
danger right now. You have a lot less just physical sensory input to say, hey, no, don't worry. It's like, no, we're worrying. Like, you have no reason to not be worrying right now. I have more reason to be right now than you. That's kind of the way that different parts of the brain interact. That's a cool thought. I think I could make a case for that.
Yeah, there's not as much conflicting input. There's no
Right.
input that says no, you're wrong. There might not be confirmatory input from the outside,
Right.
but there's at least
Right.
no conflicting input.
It's a lot harder to shout down those really, really, really powerful basic, emotions of fear and panic.
And God forbid there is confirmatory input from the outside. Like if you're playing Amnesia and then you hear like some weird noise coming from the other room,
No, that happened.
you're like, oh gosh.
Dude, I remember this. It was on winter break, and I was back home, and I was in my parents' basement, and they had an elliptical machine, and they had hung, like, my mom had hung like a workout jacket or something on the elliptical, and I was playing Amnesia, and I glanced up, and I just 100% was convinced that it was a person in the room. It was like, it was pitch dark in there, and I just could make out the outline, and it was just humid enough that I almost, like, I went blank, man. Like, I almost, like, crapped myself. It was absolutely horrifying.
It would be a great story if you did.
Yeah, no.
Then I crapped myself.
Then I just was sitting. Oh my, dude, that was I think I'd blocked that memory out until right now.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that was terrifying. So no, you're absolutely right. Or the classic, like, someone comes up behind you and jolts you, right?
Right.
That moment is just absolute terror. So anyway, so that's just a little digression on fear in video games, and Amnesia being so immersion based and requiring that, and then successfully when it does nail that. Like I said, I think and people have said, I haven't played too many horror games other than Amnesia, actually. But I've played Dead Space. I played Dead Space all the way through. So
yeah, and we watched a playthrough of Soma, which was...
Oh, yeah, we did. Forgot about that. And I've played, Bioshock has some pretty heavy horror elements. So, but anyway, I will say, I don't think I've experienced playing a game the fear of Amnesia when it really clicks and everything comes together. I think that's really one of the most disorienting and just dissettling experiences that you can have in video games. So...
Well, why don't we move on to talk about a couple of other games that do
sure.
immersion particularly
Different
well.
types of immersion?
Yeah, you had mentioned like ones, I guess, that are less emotionally based.
Yeah.
So, I mean, specifically, like, you mentioned Journey as a game that, like, it doesn't do hyper-realism, and yet it still feels like it is immersing the player. So, what would you say about that?
So, yeah, it's another fascinating one, which is... As we were thinking through things, realism, photorealism, even, like, there's a game, just real briefly, there's a game called Red Orchestra 2, which is an FPS, and people tend to call it less an FPS and more a PTSD simulator.
Oh, no.
It's freaking intense, man. I haven't played it myself. I've watched a decent amount of it. I remember when I heard about it, I looked it up. It basically really tries to actually accurately emulate what firefights feel like. It's World War II, and so the way that bullets sound getting shot, your character screams, you can bleed out. Your characters will talk to themselves, and the screaming's realistic, and it's all very, very, very brutal and very loud, and that really messes with people. It does. I mean, there's stories of people playing with someone else, and their friend gets shot, and in game he's screaming so loud that they appears to be in so much pain they actually mercy kill him, shoot him in the head, and end the game. And then, like, you have to be and then turned off the game and had to think about what they just did, like that level immersion.
Wow.
Right. And that comes from realism, right? That game just tried to make it feel as realistic possible. Or like Dunkirk, right? That movie that came out.
Yeah.
Really, at some points, probably got you close. I mean, there were people who were at Dunkirk. There were vets who said, yeah, that was not a bad approximation of how it felt to be there. So it's like that kind of realism, and that's incredibly immersive. Then we have Journey, which is not realistic in any way, shape, or form, minus like gravity and basic laws of physics. Sometimes not even that, actually. That's a big mechanic. Journey is this, if you have never heard of it, go look it up and buy it and play it. It actually takes about 2 hours tops to get the whole experience. And it's just one of the coolest, I can't speak highly enough, it's one of the coolest experiences in gaming I've also had, I think. Or at least a very unique one. I think I could say that with a lot of really cool experiences. But this is like probably one of the most unique ones I had. And it's super artful in terms of the art. That was a stupid sentence. It's very... Yeah.
The art was so artful.
I know we're talking about like the need to communicate better, and I'm using
Uh,
a word to describe itself. The art was really arty. Um, no, it's really uh, crap. Now
Journey.
I'm in
You're
my own
talking
head.
about Journey.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
It's so it's very it's not realistic. What's the opposite of realism? Like
Fantastic.
I suppose. And it's very very minimalistic. It's hugely engaging. There's none of these kind of like it's not first person, it's third person. There's none of these. It's also it doesn't draw on like I said, it's very unique in its narrative. There's no dialogue whatsoever. There's very little story even whatsoever. Basically, you load in, you're this character, this kind of sprite, and you see a mountain off in the distance with a light at the top of it shining, and that's all the game gives you. And all you can do is move at the beginning, and you just need to get to the mountain, and that's what the game is, and the whole point is getting there. And like I said, that when you're playing it, it's just one of the most you just get drawn in immediately. It's so endearing. It's very graphically beautiful, but two, the music. I think the music won a Grammy actually,
Oh
um,
wow.
in terms of like best interactive music. There's either a grant. Yeah, it was some. I think it was like a mainstream award that it won. Um, so that was just really interesting in that there's different types of immersion, right? You can have this extreme photorealistic immersion where you really feel like you're there. Like even Amnesia is a decent approximation of that. The art style in Amnesia is very realistic. Journey is very not. And yet I was just as immersed in Journey as I was in my most terrified moments of Amnesia, personally. And I think, I think I was trying to think of why that was and the difference between the two. Obviously, there's the fear mechanic there that's not there with Journey. But
Hmm.
Journey, I think, was so different and unique, and I just wanted to see what was going to happen. I had nothing to compare it to, actually.
Hmm.
But it was so cool, and it was so it really fostered a sense of wonder and exploration. I just wanted to see what the next thing was because it was so
So would you say
cool.
you were really invested in the narrative there, like the story that was being told?
Yes and no. Like I said, there's very little story. There's kind of flashbacks that you get that are told in this kind of 2D cartoon-ish, not cartoony, kind of like the tattoos on Maui in Moana. If you've watched that movie,
Yes,
they're
I
like
have.
it's exactly like that. That tells kind of this narrative. It's very unclear. It's like I said, it's completely nonverbal.
Almost like a
And it kind of
hieroglyphic sort of
yeah, yep,
communication.
yeah, precisely. Yeah, it's kind of like you're reading like these ancient. You find these like old kind of plaques, and you get shown what was happening when those plaques were kind of getting written, sort of. Um, so really, not even just the narrative. I mean, like I said, just it's such a unique world. Um, like I said, that I had almost nothing to compare to. It's not very tropey by any means. I don't really think it was the narrative. I think it was this. Like I said, it definitely helped that it was beautiful, and I just wanted to see more of it. That helped that the music was completely just complemented everything you do, as opposed to it didn't take it kind of just played the correct role of what I think music should play in a game. Um, the controls were smooth as silk. It feels really good to play,
Hmm.
um, which is weird because I don't have any sense of what it feels like to slide down this massive sand dune as this weird you don't even see your body. You're bipedal. You don't have arms. You just have this red cloak over you basically, and you have eyes. Kind of looks like something out of like I don't know, Spirited Away almost, like some of those like
Hmm.
kind of anime. It feels kind of Eastern.
So what would you say is like one of the main reasons why it feels like you're so involved with what's happening?
I don't know, like you're, and I think it's a different type of immersion, right? Like because I didn't know exactly what was going on. I didn't feel a whole lot of connection to my character,
Right.
because it is so alien in some ways, as well as there's so little narrative. So it wasn't that same type of immersion that we were talking about, kind of earlier when you're like feeling like a park ranger, right, walking around,
Right. But
or
because
certainly
the game presented you with a scenario where your expectations were very thin, and
right, almost non-existent.
yeah, and so I think it's easier for the game to, as long as the game is consistent in what it's presenting, it can feel good and feel consistent because
Right.
you don't have your own experience pushing back saying, "No, you totally should be able to climb that fence." You know.
Totally. Totally. No,
because
exactly.
like
Precisely.
you said, it's alien. It's like I don't have any idea of what is possible in this world.
Yeah, I think really the correct word and that I would give it most was like wonder. Really, I remember smiling a few times during the game when a slightly new mechanic would get introduced, or there's God. I mean, the sequence at the end is just beautiful. Is really the only way to put it. Um, and it just felt like, and like I said, it's so short, it's so compact. Um, it's you experience it once, um, and you can replay it honestly. I have done that a few times, but really nothing quite captures the first playthrough. And so, like I said, I think it's a different type of immersion. Like, this is something else that I came across that I was going to briefly talk about. There's that, like, photorealistic immersion, feeling like you're part of it. And then there's, like, these other, like, kind of like, even our initial definition, forgetting you're playing a game. That can happen without being invested. Like Tetris. Some people find Tetris incredibly immersive.
Right.
And are we supposed to tell them that it's not? Like, they completely lose themselves to that. They're completely unaware of anything else going. They're in this very flow-based um, kind of state of mind where they are just entirely engrossed in this game. And it's the least immersive game by some of the standards we've been talking about so far, and yet it'd be highly immersive there too. So I think in this case, it really it made me forget everything else other than what the game was showing me, and kind of the wonder that came along with that. Which I think is very different. Like that's why trying to define immersion is so difficult, because, like we said, it's entirely ill-defined, and immersion in Journey is way different than immersion in Amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
And yet both of them are hugely powerful. I mean, there's the other thing. Emotional investment seems to be another. You very, very quickly begin to care about your character and the story. It's a very like melancholy game, actually.
Hmm.
It seems to be very sad, and you get drawn into that, and you feel like you I guarantee you, unless you're just, I don't know, I feel things really strongly, so maybe other people won't, but I'd possibly it'd be very hard for someone to play through Journey and feel nothing throughout that entire game and just be like, oh, that was fine,
Right.
like it's a very emotional game. um and so I think that's, and same thing, people talked about like the Mass Effect games, and those are pretty classic space RPGs, and unbelievably good ones. But I think the reason people find those games so immersive is because you care about your characters so much. You're really emotionally engaged. You really, really desire good things to happen, and you want to see what's going to happen. And you want to see how they interact with the world, and all that. It's that kind of emotional investment part that I think is another huge part of immersion. And it's different for different people. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a very difficult thing to nail down what people are going to respond to.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there are so many. It does come back to this core experience, though, that people all use the same phrase for, which I think is just fascinating to me. That like,
Yeah.
yeah, but we all use the word immersion to talk about this stuff.
Yes, it's really
Very
bad
strange.
communication, it seems.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. And so it does raise the question: is everybody having the same experience for different reasons, or
Right,
are people having different experiences and we're just lazily using the same word? And it's
right.
really hard actually to know which one is true there. But
Well, it might be why people begin to resent the like the buzzwordness of immersion so often. I mean, usually people just reject something that's used over and over again, but also if you have feelings about what's going to be immersive, man, I'm at my apartment window, and uh, I look right out into a big playground in our apartment complex, and a bunch of kids are playing. This one really young kid came like right up to my window and pressed her face against it, like 3 feet away from me. Uh,
wow.
Kids are weird. Anyway, yeah, that might be part of the reason when people have these really certain, yeah, like is if people are looking for that really personal, like feeling like your character, and being motivated by them, and then that's not what the game promises, gives, then they're going to be disappointed, and suddenly immersion becomes this kind of bitter taste in your mouth, and people don't like hearing about it because they've been let down by it. I also think it's just developers want to pick up on games that were really, really good masterpieces. I think
Hmm.
that's another thing I've been thinking about. When you think about a lot of really good games, a lot of them tend to be pretty immersive, or people describe them as immersive. BioShock being a great example.
Hmm.
Um, Red Dead, Mass Effect, Fallout, Skyrim. Kind of these big classic games like that. Um, and so, of course, game developers will pick up on that and
It is
hopefully,
interesting though, like a lot of
equate that
those
with something
games
else.
that you mentioned are first person. Actually, all the games you mentioned are first person.
Really?
Yeah,
What did I say? Let's see.
Red Dead.
Red Dead's third, isn't it? Or is that first?
No, you're right. That is third person. Okay,
Yeah.
fine, fair enough. Because I
I mean, I could
when
add
I
like
was talking about immersion with my roommate and his girlfriend who are not gamers, and I said the word immersion, I was actually curious to see what they would think it meant.
yeah,
And they talked about virtual reality. They talked about,
right,
this idea of being sort of surrounded and completely involved and embedded in the game world.
right.
And so I wonder if maybe that's a lot of what people mean when they talk about immersion. But yes, there are people who, Sean said that chess felt immersive. Certainly there are people who think Tetris is immersive. Like
Right.
there are other things that people describe as immersive that don't really have anything to do with being surrounded by that game.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the word immersive, right? That's the technical definition. I'd
Right,
assume
that
would
you're
be like from being
inside.
immersed in something,
Right,
physically
like
put into
into
water,
water. Yeah, exactly.
surrounded by.
Right.
So that makes sense. But yeah, I think it really does take a tons of different forms. And then there's other things, right? Like, and I don't know if we have time to get into this, but like you even mentioned, you in Firewatch, you played the game differently. Like you had access to a mechanic in the game that took you out of it, and you decide to not use that mechanic, right?
Yeah,
Like the walking, running
yeah, the
thing.
run. So there's an unrealistic run button that you can hit where you just run, and you can run forever. And I'm like, I'm not going to use that because that doesn't make sense. I'm a normal dude. I'm not a marathoner. I'm not an Olympic like distance runner. It doesn't
Right.
make sense that I can just jog all around this park all day. So I'm not going to use that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I wanted to keep for myself the experience of exploring this at a pace that it felt like it was asking to be explored at. Like it
Right.
wasn't a landscape that was asking for you to sprint through it. It was a landscape that was supposed to be enjoyed and meant to be viewed at multiple times and multiple angles because they clearly spent a lot of time on this environment and they wanted you to soak it up.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's precisely like, and you think about other games where you a lot of times you just want to increase your speed, right? Like you don't think about the fact that you're running all the time in Skyrim,
Right.
like, or that's physically impossible for people to do, to just run for hours and hours and hours, or yeah, not be affected. But you don't think about that because you don't care, because that's something different in a game that has a mechanic as walking and running. You really have to consider that. The one for me that I actually played very differently than the way the game acts, because it took me so far out of the immersion, which was Shadows of Mordor, which is an awesome game that I love. I'm also like huge Tolkien nerd. Just love it to death, and it's by far the universe I know the best and spend the most time in. Yada yada yada. But that game, part of the fantasy that I felt it was selling or asking, and the way the game is built, narratively as well as just well, let's see. So there's narrative as well, just like the setting itself, right? The fantasy was trying to sell was the idea that you're this lone ranger, this kind of stealthy assassin-ish character, kind of caught in this enemy territory. And you have to utilize a bunch of different of your a bunch of different tools, and you have this, kind of supernatural help in the form of a wraith that is bonded with you. So you have some supernatural abilities, but in large part, you are, kind of caught in this unfamiliar territory, and you have to use your powers smartly and intelligently and stealthily. And the way the game plays actually is, you eventually just power up to the point where you can just kill everything on the map
Right.
in large part. There's nothing that can touch you. You're just this close combat monster. Getting discovered doesn't mean you can literally just walk right into an enemy like fort, and the alarm goes off, and all the orcs just swarm you, and you kill all of them, and that's it. And that was kind of annoying to me in some ways, because like it what it did is it stripped any feeling of danger or tension. It stripped a whole lot of my abilities away. It didn't feel like I should play the game in a certain way. It was just it any problem solving was taken away, and I didn't feel like a cool ranger that had to think intelligently and kind of voice. So what I did was I implemented all of these, just arbitrary restrictions on myself in terms of the upgrades I could get, and yada yada yada, and really pretty much just tried to axe all of the overpowered things I felt like the game had, and then play it that way, and that helped. It really did. I couldn't do the thing where I just could get detected and I'd have to run away, and it changed the way the game played. And I get that the reason people probably played that game was to feel like this orc murdering monster, and that is really fun. Don't get me wrong, but
Right.
that's the other thing, is that combat in that game just feels really good, right? Again, we can go into what I mean by that, but we're almost out of time. So
Right.
it feels very brutal and visceral, and the way they kind of show it is really fun, and in a way that Lord of the Rings games haven't done before too, which is fun. It's the first M-rated Lord of the Rings game ever, to my knowledge. But anyway, so a game like that, again, it's a very different immersion than we talked about with you in Firewall, or certainly with Journey or Amnesia. In that case, it's a fantasy that I feel like they're trying to sell me. Like I'm trying to feel, it's not first person either, it's third, but I'm trying to put myself in this world that I know really well and feel like what they're trying to tell me I am, which is this, ranger, assassin, wraith thing.
Right. Well,
and I should be feeling desperate and out of my element, and I should be kind of always at the edge of trying to figure stuff out, as opposed to this near omnipotent being
gonna
walk through the black gates,
smash anybody,
kill everything.
Well, we didn't really set out to prove this. This wasn't like our master thesis or anything, but it seems like something that has come out of this episode is that you as a player can choose how you want to augment your immersion. Like, as hard as it is to define immersion, if you can identify in yourself what it is the game is tapping into, there are things you can do to enhance that experience and enjoy the game more. So if the game to you, Greg, felt like, no, clearly this is set up as a sort of assassin, desperado, man outside of the law, trying to make his way through the orc camps or whatever, then like you can play him that way, and that will confirm your expectations. And like I think that's a great way to enjoy a game in I don't necessarily want to say a better way, but certainly in a different way, where you really try to turn up the volume on the fear or the stealthiness or the happiness in a game.
Right. And that's so hard. And like I didn't feel annoyed by that. I didn't feel like, oh, what crappy developers, like what horrible people. Like, I don't know. I've just never been. I tend to not blame. I just like, no, this is the way I want the game to play. And fortunately, the game was able to be played that way. Like, fortunately, I could just limit my own, upgrades in large part, and it worked. Now, that's not always true in games, where you can kind of like tune it to exactly the way you want to play. But yeah, I totally agree. I think in large part, like no one says, wow, Amnesia is such a crappy game because you have to play with the lights off. Otherwise, it's not scary. Like, it's not. We are limited in just the medium of a screen and mouse and keyboard, or controller.
You
like
started a video game and it turned your lights off, I think you've got problems.
You turn and run.
Yeah, you need to turn that.
Yeah, you
shut
get
down
the F out of there immediately.
Throw it into an incinerator.
Yeah, you burn that with holy water. Yeah, but so I think it's a good point, Mark. Is that like I don't know? I think there is something cool. Like we talked about Left 4 Dead, right? Like you always kind of feel like you're at the edge, and you always just they somehow nailed that point where you just always have enough ammo, and you always feel kind of like you're about to lose, but you never quite do. That's such a cool thing.
Right.
That's awesome, and that's really impressive for developers to do that. But I would say I think there's also a level of like, yeah, if you're looking for something specific in a game, and it doesn't quite. I don't know. Like I give the game a shot anyway, and try to play it the way that you want it to be played.
Help the game help you in some ways.
Yeah, like, kind of. Instead of just freaking out and then just flaming people online for how crappy a game is.
Right.
Games are so hard to make. I can't even imagine, man. Like even just thinking and talking about it and all these different little variables. Like I'm great at thinking about things. I'm less good at doing them. So like if I had to put any of this into practice, like it sounds impossible.
Yeah, it's certainly.
So yeah, give your games a little bit of help, man.
It is a complex undertaking, and I mean it might sound like I'm not saying that we should just ignore mistakes that developers make and things like that. Like
you don't give a free pass.
Of course, like you want to help them to refine their game, but like if you think a mechanic is like broken and like it's not realistic that I can just produce infinite gold this cheap way, then don't do it. Consider not doing it and not ruining the experience of the game for yourself, because at the end of the day, like you as the player are the one who's benefiting from having this experience.
Yeah, exactly. This is all for you, man. Like it's all for you and as the player. And make use of it. Especially like I definitely get that in multiplayer games, right? Like that makes total sense. That needs to be we're not really talking about immersion, but like more balance,
Right,
that sort of
right,
thing.
sure.
Like, oh, if this is broken, just don't use it. Like, no, that's not how that works. People will use it and you'll die.
Yeah.
But in single player games, I don't know, man. Like, that's really up to you. It's up to you how much you want to enjoy the game to an extent. To an extent, for sure. But so this became preachy.
It did at the end. It was meta in the beginning, it was preachy at the end, and it was wonderful all the way through.
Woohoo!
Thank you all for listening.
This is what you guys get come to listen. This was a great return to form for us. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our conversation on immersion for now. Yeah, if you guys think that we absolutely just murdered the definition of immersion, then you have correctly identified the correct one. Sound off.
We would love to hear from you, honestly.
Yes.
Even if it's critical feedback, that's all right. Critical feedback happens, and we need it in order to have a better podcast. We can't say that developers need to have critical feedback about their games and not receive it ourselves.
Yeah, and then be like, but we're fine.
But good thing we've mastered this.
Yeah, right. To amateur podcasters on episode 13.
You can contact us. I am Mark at gamingmechanics.net. Greg is Greg at gamingmechanics.net. You see what we did there. It's hard to remember, but
I know, but
just try.
Yeah.
And so we will. Yeah, we're going to be signing out. We'll see you next week.
Yep, see you next week if Mark survives.
Hurricane.
Which I think he will.
Irma. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Irma indeed. Yeah, man, stay safe.
I will.
And then next week we don't know what we're doing, so we will get back to you on that.
Yeah.
But we will be doing something.
We will.
Sweet.
All right.
Alrighty. Greg and Mark signing off.
See you guys. If you enjoyed this episode of Gaming Mechanics, check out our Twitter at Gaming Mechanics or Facebook by going to facebook.com/gamingmechanics. Thanks for listening.